Martell Holt. As we already know, these two have been dealing with ongoing legal issues since their divorce, and this latest update comes around October 2025, when there were plans to revisit and possibly change the custody arrangement for their 4 children. Martell did not attend the court hearing because he was reportedly in Los Angeles filming for Love and Marriage, Huntsville, although his attorney was present to represent him. At this time, Melody and Martell still share joint legal custody of their children, but Melody maintains primary physical custody, meaning the kids primarily live with her while Martell has secondary visitation rights. On top of that, there is also a financial issue involved. Martell was previously ordered by the court to pay a judgment of around $7,000, but it appears that payment has not been fully made. Because of this, Melody has now taken legal steps to enforce the judgment by requesting wage garnishment through the court. The court documents were electronically filed on April 24, 2026, in the Circuit Court of Madison County, Alabama, under a process known as garnishment. The paperwork lists Melody Shari Holt Rogers as the plaintiff and Martell LaVar Holt as the defendant, with a bank named as the garnishee, which means the institution that may be required to withhold funds. According to the documents, the original judgment was entered on June 18, 2024 for $7,000, and with added interest and court costs, the total amount now comes to approximately $8,019. The filing also explains how wage garnishment would work, stating that a portion of Martell's disposable income could be withheld, typically up to 25% or based on federal minimum wage guidelines, whichever amount is lower. Another part of the paperwork, called a writ of garnishment, instructs the bank to serve the order, respond within 30 days, and begin withholding funds if applicable. It also outlines that if Martell's employment changes, the necessary parties must notify the court and account for any amounts already collected. So overall, it seems Melody is officially moving forward with enforcing the court judgment through legal channels. Let me know what you think about this situation down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This also adds another layer to the ongoing tension between the two, especially considering how long their legal battles have been playing out since the divorce. Every new filing seems to bring the situation back into the spotlight, and fans have been closely watching how custody, financial obligations, and court compliance are all being handled over time. While some people see this as just standard enforcement of a court order, others feel like it shows that there are still unresolved issues that keep resurfacing between them. At the same time, it's important to remember that legal processes like wage garnishment are not unusual when a court-ordered judgment hasn't been fully satisfied. It simply means the court is stepping in to make sure the owed amount is collected in a structured and legal way. Still, because both Melody and Martell are public figures and their personal lives have often played out in the public eye, situations like this tend to attract a lot of attention and strong opinions from viewers. As this develops, it will be interesting to see whether Martell addresses the matter directly, or if any further court updates come out regarding payments or custody adjustments. For now, this filing just confirms that the case between them is still active and moving through the legal system. Let me know your thoughts below. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll keep you updated on the next one. Moving forward, what stands out most in this situation is how both custody and financial responsibilities are still being worked through long after the divorce. Even though there are already court orders in place, the fact that new filings are still being made shows that things between Melody and Martell are not fully settled yet when it comes to enforcement and compliance. In cases like this, wage garnishment usually signals that the court is stepping in more directly to ensure that previous rulings are actually followed. It's not necessarily about creating new conflict, but more about making sure existing judgments are carried out properly. Still, because of the public nature of both individuals, every legal update tends to gain attention and spark discussion among viewers who have been following their story for years. As for the custody side, any attempt to revisit arrangements involving the children typically focuses on stability and what is in the best interest of the kids. These types of hearings can involve a review of schedules, visitation structure, and overall responsibilities between both parents. Since Martell's absence at the hearing was due to filming commitments, his representation through an attorney means the case still moved forward in his absence, which is common in family court proceedings. At this point, the situation remains ongoing, and until the court issues any new modifications or updates, the current orders stay in effect. All eyes will likely remain on whether there are any further developments regarding the judgment payment or potential custody adjustments in the near future. At the same time, this situation also highlights how complex post-divorce court matters can become, especially when both custody arrangements and financial obligations are involved. Even when a judgment is already in place, enforcement can take time and often requires additional filings like this to ensure compliance. That's why you'll often see cases like this resurface in court records months or even years later, as one side moves to make sure the original ruling is actually carried out. From a broader perspective, cases like this also show how important documentation is in family court. Everything from custody agreements to payment orders is legally tracked, and when something isn't fulfilled, the court has the authority to step in and take corrective action, such as wage garnishment or bank enforcement. It's a structured process meant to resolve financial obligations rather than escalate conflict. For viewers following along, this is another reminder that what's happening publicly is only part of the bigger legal picture. There are often multiple filings, responses, and procedural steps behind the scenes that don't always make it into headlines or discussions. Until the court issues any new rulings or updates, both custody and financial orders remain active and enforceable as they currently stand. So for now, this case continues to develop through the legal system, and any future changes will depend on what the court decides moving forward. Looking ahead, the next key developments will likely depend on whether Martell addresses the outstanding judgment and how the court responds once the garnishment process fully moves forward. If payments begin to be collected through the bank or employer, the court will track those deductions until the full balance, including interest and costs, is satisfied. On the other hand, if there are any disputes or delays, it could potentially lead to additional hearings or further legal clarification from the court. On the custody side, any future adjustments would typically require either a new agreement between both parents or a formal ruling from the judge after reviewing updated circumstances. Courts usually prioritize stability for the children, so any proposed changes would be carefully reviewed based on what is considered in their best interest at the time. For now, everything remains in a holding pattern legally, with existing orders still in effect and enforcement actions underway. As this continues to unfold, it will mostly come down to how both parties comply with the current court directives and whether any new filings are submitted in response. Until then, this remains an active case that could still evolve depending on future court activity. At the same time, one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that cases like this can move slowly, even when enforcement actions have already started. Courts usually allow time for responses from banks, employers, and both parties involved before any final outcome is fully realized. That means even after a garnishment order is issued, it can still take weeks or months before the full process is reflected in actual payments or updated court records. It's also possible that additional filings could come into play if either side requests clarification, modification, or enforcement updates. In many family law cases, especially those involving custody and financial judgments, things are rarely a one-step process. Instead, they tend to evolve through multiple court actions over time depending on compliance and changing circumstances. For now, the situation remains active, and the court will essentially oversee how the garnishment is carried out while also maintaining the current custody structure unless a new ruling is made. Both sides will have opportunities to respond or request further legal action if needed, which means the case could still shift depending on how things unfold in the coming months. Overall, this continues to be an ongoing legal matter with multiple layers: custody, financial enforcement, and post-divorce obligations, all being handled through the court system. Any major updates will depend on future filings or official rulings as the process moves forward. At this stage, the focus will likely remain on how quickly the garnishment process is actually executed and whether any payments begin to reflect in the court's records. Once the bank or employer starts complying with the writ, the court will monitor the amounts being withheld until the full balance is satisfied. If the total debt, including interest and court costs, is fully paid off, the garnishment order would typically be closed out by the court. However, if there are any complications, such as changes in employment, disputes over income, or missed compliance steps, it could slow down the process or require additional court involvement. In situations like this, it's not uncommon for attorneys on either side to file follow-up motions just to ensure everything is being handled correctly and according to the court's instructions. On the custody side, unless a new motion is filed and approved, the current arrangement will continue as is. Any future attempt to modify custody would still require a formal review by the judge, with both sides presenting updated arguments or evidence about what has changed since the last order. Courts typically avoid frequent changes unless there is a clear reason that impacts the children's well-being or stability. For now, everything continues to move within the legal framework already set in place. The case remains active, but any real shifts will depend on either compliance with the current orders or new filings that bring additional issues before the court. Until then, this situation stays in progress, with both enforcement and custody matters being handled step by step through the judicial system. Moving forward, the next stage of this situation will largely depend on how quickly the garnishment order is processed and whether the financial institutions involved begin withholding and submitting payments to the court. Once that process is fully active, the court will continue tracking the amounts until the judgment, including any added interest and fees, is completely satisfied. At that point, the garnishment would typically be lifted and officially closed out. If everything proceeds smoothly, this could simply become a routine enforcement process with regular deductions until the debt is cleared. However, if there are any delays, objections, or changes in Martell's financial or employment situation, the case could require additional court review. In those situations, either party may file motions to update or clarify how the judgment should be enforced. On the custody side, things are expected to remain unchanged unless one of the parents files a formal request for modification. Courts usually require a significant reason to revisit custody arrangements, especially when a stable order is already in place. Any future hearings would again focus on what best supports consistency and stability for the children rather than making frequent adjustments. Overall, this remains an active legal matter with both enforcement and custody issues still being monitored by the court. While no immediate changes are guaranteed, the case could still evolve depending on compliance, new filings, or future court decisions. At this point, the situation essentially comes down to execution and follow-through within the court system. Once all parties involved, the bank, employer, and legal representatives, complete their required responses, the court will have a clearer picture of how quickly the judgment is being satisfied and whether the garnishment process is working as intended. If payments are consistently collected without issue, the case will likely move into a routine monitoring phase until the balance is fully paid off. After that, the court would issue the necessary order to end the garnishment. But if anything changes, such as job transitions, disputes over income calculations, or missed compliance deadlines, it could reopen parts of the process and require further court clarification. On the custody side, the existing arrangement remains stable unless a new petition is formally filed and reviewed. Courts typically prioritize consistency for the children, so any adjustment would need to be clearly justified and evaluated based on updated circumstances rather than routine reconsideration. Overall, this remains an ongoing legal process that is still unfolding step by step. The key takeaway is that nothing changes instantly in situations like this. Everything depends on compliance, documentation, and future court action. Until then, both enforcement of the judgment and custody terms continue under the current orders already in place. Moving forward, the situation will likely continue to develop in small, procedural steps rather than sudden changes. Once the garnishment order is fully active, the court will mainly focus on tracking compliance, making sure the required amounts are being properly deducted and submitted. If everything is handled correctly, it becomes a steady process that gradually reduces the remaining balance until it is fully satisfied. At the same time, Both parties still retain the option to return to court if anything changes. 4. Example, if there is a shift in income, employment status, or financial hardship claims, the garnishment terms could be reviewed or adjusted. Likewise, if either side believes the current custody arrangement no longer reflects the children's best interests, they could file a motion requesting